Welcome to the Castle of Spirits Paranormal Podcast Extrasode number 11. This Extrasode is brought to you by episode number 25, where we read A Voice in the Attic, a classic story from the Castle of Spirits archives.
Go back and listen to it if you haven't.
Yeah, what are you doing here? You shouldn't listen to the Extrasode
Don't
until you
jump
listen
ahead.
to the episode.
Aren't you afraid of spoilers?
Right?
Come on. But seriously, though, stories about attics, they scare me. We don't have an attic in our house. We
don't have any kind of an attic, and I kind of miss it.
No, I don't miss it.
No, attics are good and creepy.
Terrible things happen in
Our
attics.
next house is going to have a big, old, haunted attic.
Well,
that's the name of this episode, A Big, Old, Haunted Attic.
Excellent. I like it. I like it.
I know you do.
I really do.
Yeah.
Swear.
Yeah, so that's what we're reading to you today is Attic Stories straight out of the Castle Archive.
Creepy attic stories.
Mm-hmm. And Vince, take it away.
Well, I've chosen a story.
I hope so.
It feels like it ties in a little bit with A Voice in the Attic, in that there was a segment of that story wherein was described the sound of a heavy breathing moving closer and closer to the microphone of a microcassette recorder. See, people, again, this is another reason why you need to listen to episode number 25 if you haven't already. God, there's good stuff in there. But you can do that after you hear this episode. In any case, that brings me to the story that I've chosen to read today. It's called Panting from Under the Bed.
That sounds terrifying.
Written by Henry in Minnesota in February of 2010. And it goes a lot like this. I used to live in an old Victorian house when I was younger. During the Great Depression, it was used to house many unemployed people, and being quite old, I suspect it to be haunted. A few seemingly paranormal events occurred to me while I was in the house. Of course, parts of the old house that were unfinished, like the basement, were creepy, but other than the few events I'm about to describe, I never seemed to notice anything unusual. The first time something significant occurred to me was when I was reading in my parents' bedroom. I was home alone at the time, and reading some novel atop the bed when I began to hear a peculiar noise. The noise was very quiet, and it seemed to be coming from under the bed. No. If he stays there, Henry, if you stay there past this point, you're nuts. All right, let's continue. At first I brushed it off as maybe some noise coming from outside, but it grew in volume, and I realized it was panting.
Ew.
This alarmed me, and I froze in place, holding my book in my lap and listening further. The panting was getting louder, and it sounded more like someone imitating an animal panting rather than an animal or a person actually doing it. Eventually, the panting grew to an immense volume and intensity, and I had enough. My body unfroze, and the adrenaline took over. I flew off the bed in a mad dive for the door, opened it, and booked it down the hall, where I paused to make sure no one or thing was behind me. After about a minute of staring at the doorway, I gathered up my courage and went in to investigate, where I found nothing around the room or under the bed where the noise seemed to be coming from. This took a while to check, as I was very frightened.
Yeah, I don't know that I could have done it.
Not me, baby. A year later, I had forgotten about this incident. What? How do you forget about it? Okay. Until it happened again, this time in my room, which was above my parents' room. I was doing something on my bed. Again, it could have been reading or playing a Game Boy or something, when I began to hear the distinctive panting I had heard before in my parents' room coming from under my bed. Again, I froze, listening in to make sure it wasn't some other noise, and again it grew louder and louder. This time, I didn't wait around as long, and I jumped off my bed and ran down the stairs, closed my door, then went down the stairs to the kitchen where my sister was talking on the phone. And at this point, Henry mentions that his bedroom was in the attic. I think he kind of buried the lead there, if you ask me, but the story continues. I was a little flustered by what had just happened, and I didn't go back up to my room for quite a while that day. Now, I like not jumping to conclusions and remaining as logical as possible, but I have no idea what could have been making that noise those 2 days. The noise was coming only from under the bed in both instances. And the first time I was home alone, and the second time my sister, who was the only one there other than me, was 2 floors down talking on the phone. I do suspect it to be some kind of ghost, as my parents' room has always seemed a little strange, as I will detail further. This doesn't sound good. This event took place when I was young, probably 10, and I'm a bit embarrassed to admit it, but I was quite a scaredy cat. I was sleeping with my parents in their bed. I know I was a little old. When I woke up at around daybreak, I looked across the room to where my parents' massage table stood. They're both massage therapists. And I saw what appeared to be a misty, multicolored figure floating in midair. It appeared to be hooded, but other than that, there were no limbs or face that I could recognize. More like some reclining mass resembling the shape of a person wearing a hood. Hoods are bad news.
Mhm.
You see a hood?
Yeah,
Forget
there's
about
nothing
it.
good going on underneath that hood.
No. I froze in horror, and I just stared at it, though it didn't seem to notice me, and it slowly faded away. I just went back to sleep some minutes later after that, but I know I wasn't asleep when I saw it. Though the figure could have been my mind playing tricks on me, I still doubt that. What I am about to describe was something recurring that did frighten me quite a lot, and I'm not sure what it means. I write it more in hopes of having my question answered as to what it is, as it could be some psychological phenomena and could be dismissed as such. I used to sleep in my parents' room quite a lot, as I was scared to sleep alone. Whenever I did, though, and I was trying to fall asleep, the same thing would always happen to me. It's kind of hard to explain, but when I closed my eyes, I would see strange and scary faces, which usually looked demonic, floating around. This was not my imagination, as far as I know, conjuring up images like when I imagined something like a polka-dotted elephant, but it appeared to be just within my eyelid, or if it was dark enough, floating around right in front of me. The faces that I previously mentioned were quite scary and would always seem to move around, looking quite angry and opening their jaws as if to swallow me. This has only happened in my parents' room in my old house. Nowhere else where I have slept, whether in my old house, new house, or anywhere else. This, of course, could be my mind playing tricks on me, but I would love it if someone could explain to me what was happening, paranormal or not, as I always got a strange sense from my parents' room, and the floating faces were quite frightening. Oh, I would imagine that they were.
Mhm.
And you know what? Reading that, I remember this. I don't know if I remember reading the story from back in the day when we used to come on Castle of Spirits as just fans reading the stories, or if that's a phenomenon that I've heard of, or maybe something that I've experienced. The concept of closing your eyes and seeing faces, you know, on the backs of your eyelids, the way sometimes you see
Like colors moving and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And shadows, but to envision actual faces.
Yeah,
like
I've never
mouths
experienced that.
closing and opening. That sounds familiar to me. And I don't know if it's something that I saw in a movie or read in a book or experienced myself. It's a very dim sort of familiarity. So if anybody out there, if you've ever seen a movie where that's depicted or something like that, or if it's happened to you, please email us, go to thecastleofspirits.com and get in touch and let us know what that was. But that was a rather cool story.
Yeah, that was really cool. It reminded me of an experience I had. I don't know if I've told this story or not. It's just a quick one. One time that I woke up in the morning and I was, for a fact, I was awake, and you and I were staying at a hotel somewhere. I think we were coming back from California, and we'd stayed the night in Winnemucca or something. And we were sleeping, and I woke up, and I opened my eyes, and the room was pitch black. But kneeling at the foot of the bed next to me, there was a figure. Like, it looked like a figure kneeling and praying at the foot of the bed.
I remember this.
And my heart rate just skyrocketed. I was like, I can't believe this. I'm finally seeing a ghost. I was so freaked out. And then I realized that there was just the tiniest crack in the curtains, and it was just light streaming through, and just the way it was illuminating this one little sliver of the room. So I blinked my eyes and I looked and I realized, oh, it's not a ghost praying at the foot of the bed. But it was scary as hell. And at first, I thought it was real. So that's the one time that I, quote unquote, saw a ghost.
Seriously speaking, though, how do you know it wasn't? I mean, just because you can explain it away by saying, well, the curtains were cracked open and that's where the light was coming from.
Maybe the light illuminated what was already there.
Or maybe you saw what was actually there, which was some sort of a hooded figure praying at the base of the bed.
I didn't say it was hooded. You said it was hooded. I just said it was a white, glowy figure praying at the foot of the bed.
Well, it should have been wearing a hood if it was white and glowy and praying.
If it was white and glowy, then it has nothing to hide under a hood. It was a good spirit. Bad spirits hide under hoods.
Ah, okay.
Anyway.
Either way, it could have been, if we were in a gambling town passing through Nevada, as I assume we were, it may have been the ghost of a gambler praying for good luck in the casinos.
All right, my turn to read a story.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm cut off now.
Don't worry, folks. He'll be back. It Started with a Sound by KG in Massachusetts, USA, October 2009. I grew up in Wakefield, Massachusetts. The old house I grew up in was built in the mid-1800s. Prior to being a house, it was a firehouse, church, and school. I learned this as a teenager when I did a history of my house for a school project. I was the youngest of 8 kids. My 3 brothers and I shared the 3rd floor attic as a bedroom. Being the youngest, I went to bed first and was always in the room alone for an hour or 2 before others came up to bed. In 1982, I was about 10 years old. I was up in my room alone. The family was downstairs watching TV or doing homework. I heard a sound, very slight. It was an odd sound that I would best describe as sounding like an orchestra warming up before a concert.
That's some George Lutz stuff there.
It really is.
Amityville Horror.
It's terrifying.
That's exactly what George Lutz heard. Okay, I want to hear more. Keep going.
That's the scariest part of the Amityville story to me, which we talked about in the Amityville episode, the orchestra sound. It's terrifying. Many different sounds, all doing their own thing. I looked around for the origin of the sound. The closet, the stairway, outside. I couldn't distinguish a specific direction for the sound. As a minute or 2 went by, the sound began to get louder, and I started to get nervous. After 5 minutes or so, the sound was so loud that I was curled up on the floor in the fetal position with my hands cupping my ears. It was painful. Then, all of a sudden, it stopped. Dead silent. I went downstairs and asked my family what had happened. They replied that they had heard nothing unusual, then sent me back to bed. That was the day I started to see shadow people. Mostly I see them in my peripheral vision, but sometimes I see them outright. I also began hearing voices saying my name or laughing. Today, I'm 36 years old. I have a few clear memories of my past, yet I remember that incident like it just happened. Thank you again, KG in Massachusetts, October 2009, for submitting that. That's terrifying.
It's got a little bit of everything in that story, doesn't it?
It's
got
really
the shadow
does.
People.
Yeah.
The creepy ass orchestra sound.
It's a lot of marks.
I wonder what that is.
Yeah, I don't know. So that's the second time I've heard of, the orchestra tuning up type sound. If that's something that you've experienced before, please, folks, let us know. We want to hear it.
I don't want to hear an orchestra tuning up in the middle of the night.
I mean, it's terrifying, but I would totally be here for it.
Would you really? Would you leave the bedroom and come out and investigate if you thought you heard that?
Yes.
Would you call the cops? What do you tell the cops when you call?
No, I wouldn't call the cops.
No.
Mm-mm. What are they going to do? Bring a conductor?
Well, we actually know one.
I know. I was going to say I'll call Mike, our conductor friend. Call Mike and have him come over and
ask him. Mike, have you ever heard of like
ghostly orchestras?
Exactly. And what do you do for something like that? Do you have a number I can call in the middle of the night? You can come over with your baton and
go to like conductorsrs.com.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Maybe.
In my experience, the conductor has to know exactly what's happening and what's going to happen to conduct the orchestra.
Right. But if they're just tuning up,
maybe they already have their own conductor.
Ooh, maybe.
I don't know.
So many questions.
Lots and lots of questions.
Lots of them. Do you have another story to read?
I do have another story to read.
Alrighty, let's hear it.
This story is called The Light Goes On, The Light Goes Off. It's submitted by Anonymous in the US of A in August of 2015. I grew up in a small farm town called, Bergelenfield.
What's it called?
Bergelenfield. Bergelenfeld. Let's go with that.
Okay.
It's a few miles outside of Nuremberg, Germany. I can say those words. We lived in an old house that first was a school, then a barn, and then the last owners turned it into a house. My mother said that when they first bought the house, they discovered really old school desks and chalkboards and kids' clothes in the storage hall in the attic. The house consisted of 4 levels: the basement, the main floor, the middle, and the attic. My room was on the middle floor until I was a bit older. I always wanted the attic because I thought it would be cool, and also because my parents were always fighting at night and I didn't want to hear it. Kid, I sympathize. I know what you're talking about. Once my parents let me take the attic, it had to be cleaned up a bit first. It wasn't too dirty, and because the prior owners had used it as a bedroom before. I spent most of my time in the attic, as I was a hermit and I didn't like to socialize. You're talking my language, not Anonymous. A few nights after I moved in, I felt someone was watching me. Sometimes I'd be doing something with my back faced away from my bedroom doorway, and all of a sudden, I just get the feeling as if someone had walked in and was walking around my room, or even toward me. After the first month or so that I had been staying in the attic, the scariest things happened to me that to this day, when I talk about them or even think about them, they send a chill up my spine. The first account, it was late at night, and I'd gotten out of bed because I wanted to play with my toys. I knew my parents would be asleep, so they couldn't catch me out of bed. I'd only been playing for maybe a few minutes when I heard some footsteps coming up the stairs. My heart stopped, and I raced back to my bed, leaving the light on and just covering myself completely under the blanket. I thought it was my mom at first, but it sounded like heavy boots, so then I thought it was my father. The way my room was set up, my bed was right next to the doorway of the attic stairs. There was no door, it was just open. The footsteps came up the stairs, and I heard them plain as day take the last step into my room. But then they stopped. I didn't hear them anymore. In fact, I didn't hear anything. If it was my father, he would have whipped my behind right then and there. The other bone-chilling thing was that my blanket was knitted, so there were tiny holes, and I could see through them if I focused right. I looked through them. I didn't see anyone or anything. I just remember being so confused. Still contemplating if it was my father, I somehow made myself believe that it was, in fact, him, and that he had somehow left quietly, and that it was his idea to scare me. I lay in bed, trying to make sense of it all, about to take the blanket off of my sweaty head to breathe some fresh air. And then it happened. My bedroom lights started flipping on and off. I literally was staring at the light switch, which was right next to my bedroom doorway, watching it flip up and down without a hand of flesh to do so. Through the holes in my blanket, I could see there was no one there. My father was not standing at the top of the stairs, nor was my mother. That night, I stayed under my blanket, quiet and still, sweating, heart pounding in my chest, my bedroom light blinking on and off non-stop.
Oh, no.
I remember sweat trickling down my face and going into my eye and burning my eye, but yet I was frozen. I woke up the next morning. I had fallen asleep to my light switching on and off all night. My hair was stuck to my head from all the sweat. I was certain at that point that it was not my parents. However, I knew that if I told them about it, then I'd also have to explain why I was out of bed in the first place. So I kept my mouth shut. That's the end of the story. From Anonymous in USA, August of 2015. Terrifying things happen in attics.
Yeah, attics are damn scary.
Now, you slept in a basement.
Yeah.
It was a lot like an attic, except that it was below.
Yeah, it was a really, really creepy basement, but it wasn't haunted, unfortunately. My brother tries to tell me, because he took the room after I moved out, he tries to tell me, yeah, it was haunted. No, it wasn't.
Haunted by spiders?
It was haunted by big spiders.
Okay, now let's talk about this.
I don't want to talk about spiders.
You lived in that attic, in that basement.
Yeah.
In the basement attic. For how many years?
10 years.
So how do you know that you didn't leave some sort of psychic impressions behind that could be picked up later by your brother as a haunting?
Maybe. So I'm haunting my own brother. Take that, Curtis.
That takes the whole sibling rivalry to a new level.
That's right. He can't haunt me back.
Just make sure
he doesn't know how.
Just don't make sure you don't move into any place that he's lived, and you're safe.
Okay, that's easy. Yeah. So I think that's all the stories we have for today. However, I failed to mention something in episode 25 that I was really hoping to mention, and I forgot.
A Voice in the Attic episode.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to let you know that if you liked episode 25, if you liked A Voice in the Attic, if you're a fan of that story, Vince is, obviously, he's a phenomenal writer. And if you want more,
Stop. Keep going.
I shall if you shut up and let me. If you want more stories that he has written, these ones are unfortunately not true in any way, but you should check out we have 2 books, Shadows on the Page and More Shadows on the Page, and we'll put the links in the show notes. He has these 2 books of short stories that are just creepy and wonderful.
And you are, again, too modest because Jane is a very talented artist.
Ugh.
And she created, way to sell it. Way to sell it. It's like, Mr. Van Gogh, how much do you want for that painting? Ugh, you don't want to buy that. That's why he never sold a painting.
He sold 2 paintings.
All right, but he wasn't there when it happened. So, because if he had been there, he would have talked them out of it.
Yeah, so I did some paintings for the books as well. Some of them I'm pretty happy with. Some of them I keep looking at and I'm like, we really should release like a new edition of these books with different artwork.
Wow.
There's some of the paintings that I'm just like,
so I can
no.
imagine there's like maybe half a dozen people at this point that are just about hovering their mouse over the buy, and they hear you say that and they're like, oh wait, I'll wait till the next edition comes out. Guys, it's not coming.
Yeah, it's probably not coming. There'll just be paintings in there that I'm unhappy with forever. But yeah, you should check them out and let us know what you think.
And leave a review wherever you buy it.
For reals.
And tell the world. Because I've done the same.
If you really, really like it, tell Vince that the world needs a Shadows on the Page 3 because he has insisted he's not doing it, but I would be up for it.
Well, one must not argue with the muse. When the muse comes, the muse comes. When it goes, it's gone.
She bye-bye.
Yes.
Anyway, do you have anything else for the good people?
I do, in fact.
You do?
We got an email.
Okay.
This email comes from Bill.
Hi, Bill.
And Bill says, I did have some spooky goings on at Hawaii when I was about 8 to 13 years old. I also had some spooky things happen when I was on Guam from July of 2007 to July of 2010. Have you guys ever heard any stories from either of these 2 places? Actually, Bill, I have. In the past episode of the podcast, we did talk about the Tatamona spirits of Guam. My very best friend in the world, Glenn, his family's from Guam. And I remember one time, dozens of years ago, he regaled me with these horror stories that his grandfather used to tell about having experienced and witnessed the child spirits that would run along the highway.
We talked about that in one of our first couple of episodes.
Yeah, look it up. Check out
early episodes.
Check out our first handful of episodes. And we may also have read a couple of stories about the ghosts of Hawaii. But if we have not, that's a great subject to dive into in a future episode because island spirits are some of the coolest and creepiest ones.
Well, and Hawaii has very famous experiences in the night marchers, which we've not spoken about on this podcast, but I'm sure that we can at some point.
So thanks a lot, Bill, for sending us that email.
Yeah, might have just sparked a couple of new episodes.
Yeah, stay tuned for future episodes of the Castle of Spirits Paranormal Podcast.
And if you'd like to know what topics are coming up soon, then you should sign up for our email list on our website. I swear not to spam you. We don't email any more than once a week, and sometimes not even that frequently. So,
yeah, we're a little bit behind.
Yeah, I fall behind sometimes. But yeah, sign up for our email list because we let our email subscribers know what episodes are coming up soon.
So that they can participate by sending in their own stories or comments.
Right. So, Vince, that's all I have for our friends today.
I have one more thing.
Oh.
A bit of sage advice.
Oh.
Take it from the old one.
He is the old one.
Stay away from the attic.